Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I have been avoiding this topic from a very long time, but then many of you loved the CSS Flexbox tutorial and wanted me to create a video on CSS Grid. So this is it. In this video, we are going to cover everything about CSS Grid in a very simplified way so that you can use them in your projects like CSS experts. Also, don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. So let's get started. So before we jump directly into the code, I want to show you some slides that will really help us to understand the CSS grid better. Let's first understand the difference between CSS Flexbox and CSS Grid is. If you don't know Flexbox, then I have a complete tutorial on it. You can click on the card above and jump to it directly. So in the Flexbox, we can deal with the layouts in one direction. We can either use flex direction as row or column for the flex items. But CSS Grid gives us more power and flexibility in designing our layouts. As it is two-dimensional, we can deal with rows and columns at the same time. Let's explore some core concepts of CSS Grid. So to use CSS Grid for designing layouts, we should always have a grid container that holds all the grid items in it. So the white dashed box is our container. Next, the CSS Grid have lines, which are the column lines and the row lines. So here, the L1 to L4 in yellow are the column lines and the orange one are the row lines. These lines defines the start and the end of the grid cell. Now let's see what a cell is. So a cell is a single grid as shown in the slide. Item 1 is a cell, and we can merge the cells as shown in the item 2, which contains two cells. Next thing we should know in CSS Grid is the track. So a track can be a row or it can be a column as shown in the slides yellow dotted box. And the last thing which is very important in CSS Grid is the grid area. So an area can be defined as a square or a rectangle box which is made up of by combining rows and columns together. So now we understood some concepts in CSS Grid. This will make our lives a little bit easy when we use the property. So let's get our hands dirty with CSS Grid. All right, guys. So I already have some HTML boilerplate code with me. Let me give you a walkthrough of it. So this is my HTML page, and in the HTML page, I have a div with the class grid container, and it contains 6 child divs and having a class of grid item and item 1, 2, 3 to 6, and it has the content of item 1 to 6 in it. And I'm using two CSS files. The first file is the style.css, which is showing you the general style, which the background as black and the color to my child items. So this is what is, but this is not the important thing here to look into it. We are going to working on the grid.css file where we actually apply the grid properties on the grid container and the grid items. So the first thing I want to show you is that when we work with the CSS grid properties, we have some properties which we apply to the grid container, which is the parent, and some properties which we applied to the items or the grid items, the child elements. So in order to make this container, the grid container, act as a grid, what we need to do, we need to add a dot grid container, and we need to add it as a display grid. And you will see that when I add a display grid, all my child items will stretch themselves and they will fit into the grid container. So if I save it, then you will see now that all the child items or the grid items now stretch themselves and they are fitting into the container. So this is how, using the display grid, you convert a normal container into a grid container, and then it creates a context for its grid items to work with it. And the next thing we will do is we need to define the number of columns and rows, because grid is all about columns and rows. So in order to define the columns, what we do, we usually do grid template column, and this grid template column will help us to define the number of columns you want. So let me give an example of 100 pixel. So this is going to give me a one column which will have its width as 100 pixels. So if I save it, then you will see that all my grid items now having a width of 100 pixel and all are in a single column. So if I want to make two columns, then I just need to do a space here and I will add 200 pixels. So my second column will be now a width of 200 pixels. So if I save it, then you will see that now my grid items are now in two columns. And now if I want that, I need a third column which should fill all the space which is left over, then I can simply use an auto here. So it is going to create three columns and the third column will contain all the remaining space inside my container. Apart from that, we can also use the units as percentages. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give a 25% and I will mix up with an 100 pixel of second column and then the auto. So it's going to adjust accordingly. CSS column also takes some other units which is called the fraction unit, FR. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give a 1 FR and I can give 2 FR. So I will have two columns. The one column will be with 1 FR and the other column will be twice of the first. And it works very similar with the flex grow and flex shrink. So if I save it, then it's going to take all the space with one column as one FR and the other column will be the twice as the first column. And if I need to make this as two or three columns, then I'm going to use one FR, and it's going to give me a three equal columns. We can use a repeat function. So on the repeat function, what I can do, I can write a repeat and I need three columns. So I'm going to give the number of columns in the first parameter and the second parameter is will be the width of your columns. So now if I save it, then I'm still going to get the same result. So similarly, if I want to have a 12 columns, then I'm going to give, and this is going to create the 12 columns. And the other thing which I really like is the min max. So what we can do is we can actually let's remove this, and what I'm going to do, I need my first column to be 1 FR and I need that my second column should be having a min max. So the minimum value for the second column should be 100 pixel and the maximum value it should take as 500 pixel. And now if I save it, then you will see that I have two columns. The first column is 1 FR and the second column is 100 minimum and 500 the maximum. And what that gives, that you will see that if I change my viewport, then only the first column will adjust automatically based on the available size, but the second column will actually contain its minimum of 100 and maximum of 500. So if I shrink more, then you will see that this is the minimum which is can occupy. So this is how you can use the min max. And this all we applied on the columns can also be done on the rows. For the rows, what we can do grid template rows. And in the grid template rows, we can do similar thing. I can have my first row as 25% of height, and then I can have 100 pixel for the other one, and I want the remaining one as auto. And if I save it, then now I'm going to get three rows. So this is the first row, this is the second row, and this one is the third row. And you can also add the repeat here. So if I add the repeat, I need I need 5 rows. So I'm going to write 5 here, and then I'm going to write my height should be 1 FR, and it is going to create 5 rows. So right now I only have the items 6. So what I can do, if I add more items here, so I'm going to add more items, then they are going to go to the new row. All right, so I'm going to remove this again. Okay, so now we understood how we actually define the columns and rows. Suppose that if you don't know how many rows or you will have, you can actually use the grid auto rows. And this grid auto rows, you can give the value as, let me give the value as 100 pixel. And if I have a 50 pixel to the first row and I'm not sure what the second and the third row should have the height, then if I save it, then you will see the first one take the 50 pixel, but the second and the third row will take the 100 pixel. And even if I remove this, then all the rows will be having a 100 pixel of height. So this is another good thing. If we don't know the number of rows and what the rows height should be, then it's going to take it automatically the 100 pixel or whatever the value you provided. Let's provide a value of min max, and I'm going to give a min max of minimum 50 and maximum should be 100. The next property I want to show you is grid column gap, and I can give a gap of 10 pixel, let's say. So this is going to create a space which is called the grid gap between the two columns. So now in the first column and in the second column, you will see there is a space of 10 pixel. And if I need a space between the rows, I can use similar property grid row gap, and this will give me the space between my rows. So now there is a space between the rows. So this is how it's very easy to create space between the rows and the columns and create the structure. And if you need that your space is same for the columns and the rows, you can actually eliminate this and you can use a simple property as grid gap, and this grid gap is going to give you a gap on both the columns and the rows if the values are same. Next property I want to show you is how actually you can do the alignment. You can do the alignment of the content and also the alignment of the items. So for the alignment of the content, what I'm going to do, I'm going to just change this to repeat so that we can get a better view. All right. And now if I want to align my items in the center, what we can do, we can use the justify items, and the justify items, if I do it center, then you will see that all my items are in the center of my grid cell. And this we can actually see if I inspect it, and if I hover on the grid container, then in the Chrome DevTools we can actually see the grids. So you will see that now all my items are in the center of my grid. And similarly, if I want to do it on the start, so I can do it start. So this will go to the start, and if I go to the end, then it's going to go to the end. But make sure that you are using here as end and not the flex end or a flex start. So you are only using the start, center, and end. And by default, the value is stretch. If I just comment this out, you will still see the same value. So by default, the value of justify items is stretch. And similarly, if we want to align the elements vertically, we can use the align items. And if I do the align items as start, then it's going to align at the start. And if I want to do it at the end, it's going to do it at the end. And you can see here with the grid that it is at the end of the grid. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create this as center, and I'm going to add this as center. And now if I hover it, then you will see that my item is exactly at the center of my grid cell. So these are the two properties with which you can actually do the justify and alignment of your items. The next property I want to show you is you can actually do the complete container alignment. So if you want to do the complete container alignment, what you can do is, let me change this to, okay, so let me change this to, I'm going to change this to 100 pixel and 200 pixel. All right, now we can see that we have some space on the right hand side. And now if I want to align all the elements in the center, then I can use the justify content. And right now the justify content is at the start. I can change this to end. So it's going to go to the end of my container. And if I do it center, then it's going to be at the center of my container. So you can see that if I hover it, then it's on the center of my container. And you can also add the space between. So if I add space around, then it's going to give the space around. So this is the space around. We can do the space between as well. So this is the space between. So you can apply all those properties of alignment and justification which we saw in the Flexbox. The only thing we need to consider here is it's not the flex start, it's just the start. And if we want to do on the vertical, then we can do the align content. And let me do it align content at the start. Now all the content is aligned at the start. We can do it at the center. And let me make this as also center. All right, so now everything is on the center of my container. So these are the aligned item and aligned content properties. Let me comment this, remove this actually. All right. The next thing I want to show you is the grid template area, which is very useful when actually we design the layouts. So to do the grid template area, I'm just going to remove. So for grid area, what I'm going to do, I'm going to add grid template area, and I'm going to use that my first row should be the header. So I'm going to do header and again header and again header, and that is I'm writing the header 3 times because I have 3 columns, and all the 3 columns should have the header on the first row. So now in the item 1, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to add a grid area, and I'm going to use the same header which I gave. And now if I save it, then you will see that the first row is completely occupied by my header. Similarly, after the header, what I want that my second row should be the banner. So for that, I'm going to use banner, and my third row should contain the sidebar, and there will be a main content in it. So I want that the 2 columns should be the main content, and only the 1 column should be the sidebar. And I want my fourth row should also be a sidebar. So I'm going to give main. And the last one, I want that it should be a footer. So I'm going to add the footer here. All right. And now we just need to use these areas into our grid items. So for the second, I want to be a banner. So I'm going to use grid area, and I'm going to write banner. So this is going to have my banner. For the third one, I need to have the sidebar. So I'm just going to write a sidebar here. All right. Similarly, for the fourth one, I need to have a grid area of main content. And the fifth one, I need to be the grid area as footer. And this is how easily the complete page structure is done using the grid areas. But I don't use the template area much because I need more flexibility. And in order to get more flexibility, what you can actually do, instead of using the grid template area, I'm just going to comment this out. And we can actually use here as, let me remove this. So I want that my first row completely should be the header. So I can use that my grid column start from 1, and the grid column end should go till the 4. And if I save it, then I'm still going to get the same, but I'm not getting the same because of these. So let me remove all this stuff. So let's remove this. And now if I save it, then you will see that I still get the same area. And this 1 and 4 are the column lines which we saw in the slides, that we have the column lines. So it starts from this as 1, this as 2. So if I inspect this, so let me inspect this and show you. So you will see that we have the first line, then we have the second line, then we have the third line, and then we have the fourth line. And this column line starts from, counting starts from 1 2 3 4. And if you want to go to the reverse order, it starts from -1 -2 -3 and -4. So I can actually write this as -1 as well. So if I write the -1, it's still going to give me the same result. So for the second item also, I want to be the complete banner. So I'm just going to copy and this. So I'm going to get the second. For the third one, I want it that my column start. So I'm going to add that my column should start from 1, and my column should end at 2. So, and for the fourth one, we can do it that column should start from 2 and column should end at 4. So this is going to give me the main area. But instead of writing this column start, column end, we can actually use as grid column. And this grid column, we can actually write it as 1/4. So it starts from the 1 and it's end at the 4. So this way you can actually use the grid column start and grid column end. And if we want to club it, we can use the grid column. Let me show you a structure using this grid columns and grid rows. So what I'm going to do is, I need the first column as 1/4. I need my second column start from 2 and it should end at 3. And then I need my third column. It should start from grid column, and the third should start from 3/4. And similarly for the row, what I want, I can do the grid row, and the grid row should start from 2 and 4. For the fourth one, I can actually do the grid column as 1, grid row as 2 by 4. All right. And for the fifth and the sixth one, I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste this to here, and I'm going to just change the values. So you understood the logic behind adding the 1 to 4, 4 to 1. So now if I save it, then you will see that it gives me such a nice structure. And if it wasn't because of the grid, then it will be a really difficult to achieve this structure using the floats, positions, and the Flexbox, because Flexbox also runs in one direction. So the next thing I want to show you is you will see that there is a little bit overlap of 4 and 5. So the 4 is starting from 1, 2, and this one is 3, and this one is 4. So the 4 is going from 2 to 4, but if I make it this as 3, then it's going to work properly. But one thing you can do it that if you are overlapping something, so if I want to overlap, like I'm going to write this as 4, and you will see that the 5 is overlapping on the 4, but grid gives you that you can apply a z-index property. And if I want the 4 should come on top of 5, then I can actually use the z-index property as 1. And this is going to give me 4 on top of the grid item 5. So that's how the grid is powerful. We can do the same thing. I mean, these are just the different ways of writing. You can actually do that. I need this to be as span 3, because I want that it should contain the 3 cells. So 1, 2, and 3 cells. So you can also use it as span 3. I want this to be contained as one span, so I'm going to use as one span. It's all the different way of writing, and whichever way you feel comfortable. All right, so these are some of the properties on the parent and the child. And next thing we want to do that if you actually want to override some of the properties on the items, we can do the same way we do it on the flex. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change this. All right, and let me show you how we can actually do the alignment on the grid item itself. So I can use justify self, and if I do it justify self from the start, then it's going to do the alignment on the horizontal axis. So it's going to from start, if I make it this end, it's going to go to the end. If I want it to be on the center, it will go to the center. So this is on the horizontal, and if I want to do it on the vertically, then I can actually do the align self. So I'm going to use align self, and I'm going to do it at center. And this is going to give me in the center of my grid cell. So if I inspect it and if I hover it, then you will see that it is at the center. And if we want to use the justify self and align self both at the same time, we can actually use place self. And in the place self, the first value will be the vertical align. So if I want to align it vertically at the start, and horizontally it should be at the end. So now if I save it, then you will see that horizontally it's at the end, but vertically it's at the top. And if I want both at the center, I can actually do it at the center. So it's going to give me at the center. So these are all the grid properties that you need to know, and that's enough. You don't need to know all the other properties which they have. These are some of the important properties, and using those properties, you can actually design your layouts very easily. So just do a small recap on the parent. We can actually add first as display grid. Once you have the grid, you can actually define the columns and rows, and that you can do it using grid template columns and then grid template rows. You can also use the functions like min, max, and repeat on defining your columns. If you need a space between your rows and columns, you use the grid gap. And if you want to define the areas, you can use the template areas and you can design your layout. So these properties were on the parent. Apart from that, if you want to do the justify item and align content or justify content on the container, then you can use the justify content and align content, justify item and align item. On the grid items, you can actually use the grid column start and grid column end, and you can apply the values as the row lines 1, 2, 3, 4, or If you want to do it on a reverse order, you can use -1, -2, -3, -4. If you want to apply the start and the end for the grid column at the same time, you can actually use grid column property. And these value can also be represented as span. So you need 3 spans, that means 3 cells, and here you need only 1 cell. And the last thing is, if you want to override the properties which you applied on the parent for justification or the alignment, you can actually do it via align self and justify self. And if you want to do the both, you can use the place self. And that's it. That's all the CSS grid is all about. With this, you can design any layouts. I'm going to design a complete website responsive using the grid in my coming videos, so that you can have a practical implementation of CSS Grid which you learned in this video. So I hope you like this video. A thumbs up is appreciated. Also, don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. And you can connect with me via Facebook or Instagram. I will add the links in the description below. And thank you